The dog who waited. There are places in America where time seems to slow down, where the world spins gently, wrapped in routine and quiet kindness. The kind of place where people still wave to passing cars, where front porches matter, and where a man's bond with his dog isn't just noticed, it's remembered. That place for this story is Maple Ridge, a small town tucked along the southern edge of Indiana. In the early months of 2007, the streets still breathed the cold of January. Snow clung stubbornly to the corners of sidewalks, and the trees stood bare, their dark limbs scratching the pale sky. At the far end of Whitmore Avenue lived Walter Henley, a man in his late 70s, widowed for over a decade. He was the kind of figure you saw daily, not because he demanded attention, but because he moved with such consistency that he became part of the rhythm of the town. Always with the same wool coat, a tweed cap, and a gentle nod for anyone who passed. And always, without exception, with a dog at his side. Rusty was a reddish-brown mix of Labrador and Shepherd, getting on in years himself. He had a slightly crooked ear, the result of a scrape with a barbed wire fence years back, and a cautious gait in winter from old hips. But every morning, without fail, the two of them would leave the small brick house at 7:45 a.m. and walk toward Station Street, where the old town bus stopped near the diner. Walter had no pressing reason to take the bus. He hadn't worked since 1998. But the driver, Earl, said Walter liked to ride 2 stops down to the library, sip coffee on the bench, read the local paper, and sometimes chat with Miss Lillian, the retired schoolteacher who ran the front desk. Then he'd come back on the 9 a.m. return. It was a ritual, familiar, comforting, something to hold on to. And Rusty, being the dog he was, would follow him halfway, just until the edge of the diner's parking lot, then sit, tail curled beside him, and wait. He'd wait through wind, rain, or the drifting frost of morning. Wait until the old man returned. Then they'd walk back together, side by side, as if no one had moved at all. Locals grew fond of the sight. Mrs. Plimpton, who ran the flower shop across the street, said it warmed her heart, like something from a book nobody writes anymore. Teenagers snapped photos. Kids waved. Rusty didn't move. He wasn't guarding anything. He was just waiting. But one morning, February 14th, the routine ended. Walter didn't come back. He collapsed while climbing the front steps of the library, just minutes after greeting Miss Lillian with a soft, "Morning, ma'am." He was gone before the paramedics arrived. Back at the stop, Rusty waited. The bus returned. People got off. No Walter. Rusty stood, took a few steps forward, looked toward the door. Nothing. Then he sat down again. By mid-afternoon, the news trickled in. Earl heard from dispatch. The librarian confirmed it. By dusk, most of Maple Ridge knew that Walter Henley, veteran, woodworker, and widower, was gone. But Rusty didn't understand words. He didn't read notices or attend memorials. He didn't know what a heart failure was. What he knew was that Walter always came back. Always. So the next day, he went again. Sat at the same spot, same time. And the next day, and the next. Neighbors began to notice. For the first few days, some tried to bring him back to Walter's house. But he'd return the next morning, walking the same cold sidewalk on his own. By the end of the week, they stopped trying. Rusty had made his choice. He would wait. Rusty stayed. Even after the footprints faded in the snow. Even when no one stood at the bus stop, except teenagers glued to their phones, and retirees moving slow with canes and thermoses. He was there, each morning without fail. Rusty padded out from under the porch of Walter's old house, crossed Whitmore Avenue, and made his way to the diner lot beside the bus stop. Same corner, same posture, eyes focused down the road. The winter deepened. Some days were so cold the air bit through your scarf and found the bones. On those mornings, Bev, the waitress from the diner, would bring out a paper cup of warm broth and place it beside him. Rusty didn't beg. He didn't wag his tail. He barely moved. He was waiting, and waiting was sacred. By the start of March, his story began to travel. First, it was locals posting pictures online. Then a column in the Maple Gazette. Then the Indianapolis paper picked it up. The Dog Who Waited. The title sat in bold above a photo of Rusty curled up in the snow, staring at the bus doors. People came to see him. A few offered to adopt him. The county shelter sent a van one afternoon. They approached gently. No nets, no force, just kind voices and slow hands. But when they tried to lead him away, he pulled back, hard, whined, growled, refused to go. Even after years of aging and limping, he made it clear he wasn't leaving. So they left him be. The shelter set up a small wooden house near the stop, a clean one with a padded floor and roof overhang. Someone donated a fleece blanket. Another brought a heated bowl. Donations came in quietly. Envelopes slipped through mail slots at City Hall with notes that read, "For the old boy who still believes." The town watched. The world watched. But Rusty wasn't performing. He was just keeping a promise. Then came her. Her name was Dana Whitaker. Mid-40s, worn coat, mismatched gloves. She came into town on a Tuesday in April, riding a Greyhound from 3 states away. Her first stop wasn't the diner or the motel. It was the bus stop. She didn't know what pulled her there exactly. Maybe curiosity. Maybe the soft ache of a familiar pain. But she'd read about the dog. She'd stared at his photo online at 2 a.m., her laptop glowing like a wound in a dark hotel room. And something about those eyes, about the way he watched a road that never gave back, felt like home. She approached slowly. Rusty looked up. She knelt a few feet away. Didn't speak, just watched with him. They sat like that for 20 minutes. No one disturbed them. Finally, she whispered, "I know what it's like to wait for someone who's not coming back." Her voice broke. Rusty didn't move, but his tail flicked once. A slow, tired wave. The first sign of life he'd shown a stranger in weeks. That night, Dana returned. This time with a sandwich and a blanket of her own. The next morning, she came again. By the end of the week, she had a folding chair, a paperback novel, a thermos. She didn't ask him to leave. She didn't call him away. She waited with him. By the second week of April, it was no longer odd to see them together. Rusty, the loyal old dog who once sat alone at the edge of the lot, now rested beside a woman in a green canvas chair, her coat zipped tight, paperback resting on her lap, her eyes rarely reading. She didn't talk much, just offered small comforts, soft-spoken hellos, small food scraps, an old quilt she kept folded at her feet. She didn't try to pet him unless he came close. She understood boundaries. The town noticed. Bev from the diner started bringing out 2 cups of broth instead of 1. Earl, the bus driver, gave a little nod each morning and called out through the open door, "Still no sign, huh, boy?" Rusty no longer jumped when people approached. He didn't retreat. He still watched the road, but something had shifted. He wasn't only watching, he was listening. To her. It took nearly a month before he followed her. Not far. Just a few steps past the edge of the lot, tail twitching, legs slow from age and stiffness. Dana paused when she noticed, afraid even a glance might make him change his mind. He didn't. The next day, he followed her all the way to the corner. Then, by the weekend, all the way back to the motel. She hadn't planned to stay that long. Dana had come to Maple Ridge to see the dog. A one-day visit, maybe two. But time moved differently there. And something in her chest, that tight, hollow space she'd carried since January, had started to loosen. It wasn't healing exactly. It was softening. She called her office in Columbus and extended her leave. No one was surprised. Her coworkers had seen the change in her after Mark died. The silence, the drifting, the way her voice had lost its edges. She wasn't ready to return. So she stayed. And Rusty, quietly, cautiously, let her in. By mid-May, they walked side by side. Not far, just a slow loop from the bus stop to the corner and back again. But it was enough to make people smile. Children waved. Someone tied a blue ribbon to Rusty's house. Someone else left flowers. And still, each morning, at 7:45 sharp, they went to the bus stop. They didn't wait for Walter anymore, but they honored him. Because rituals mattered, even after the ones we love are gone. One morning, Dana brought a photo. It was small, worn at the edges. A picture of her husband in army dress blues, standing beside a dog that looked strikingly similar to Rusty. Same strong frame, same warm eyes, same slightly crooked ear. This was Baxter, she said softly, holding the photo between her palms. He died in 2004. Mark used to say that dog saved his life. Rusty nudged her wrist with his nose. Not hard, just once. She didn't cry. Not right then. But that evening, back in the motel room, she left the light on and whispered, "Maybe you came back in another form, huh? Just for me?" She didn't really believe in such things. But sometimes, hope wears fur. June arrived quietly. In Maple Ridge, June meant warm asphalt and children on bicycles. Cracked garden hoses stretched across yards, and the heavy scent of lilacs clinging to the air. Rusty had begun to sleep longer. He didn't move as fast. His legs trembled when he stood, and sometimes Dana had to gently support his side when stepping down curbs. The vet, a quiet man named Dr. Lang, told her gently that age was catching up. "He's older than he looks, probably pushing 15. Dana nodded. She already knew. She could see it in his eyes, the same eyes she saw in the mirror some mornings. Tired, but still open to light. They kept their routine, still went to the bus stop. But one morning, June 11th, Rusty didn't get up. He wasn't in pain. He wasn't afraid. He was just still. Dana sat beside him on the motel bed and placed her hand on his chest. His breathing was slow, rhythmic, the kind of breathing that told you something was closing, but gently. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "It's okay now. You waited long enough." And for the first time since she'd arrived in Maple Ridge, she didn't go to the bus stop either. That evening, as the sun lowered behind the diner, Dana carried Rusty's bed outside and laid it in the patch of grass near the old wooden doghouse beside Station Street. He curled up without a sound. She sat next to him, leaned against the wood, and watched the empty road. People passed by and nodded. A few stayed for a moment. Bev brought a blanket and tucked it around Dana's shoulders without asking. No one needed to say anything. They just knew. Rusty died 2 mornings later. It was peaceful. He was in his sleep, inside the old shelter built for him years ago. One paw outstretched, head resting against the wooden edge, just like he'd always waited. Dana found him before sunrise. She sat for nearly an hour before calling anyone. Then, quietly, she made arrangements. The town offered to bury him on the hilltop field just behind the bus line, where he'd first started his watch. Dana chose a stone, nothing fancy, just his name, the years, and a single line beneath. He waited with love. For the next few days, people left flowers. Kids drew chalk hearts on the sidewalk. Someone carved a small wooden sign that read, "Rusty's Spot," and hammered it gently into the grass. Dana stayed another week, then another. She wasn't sure when it happened, exactly, but at some point, she realized she'd stopped counting the days since she arrived. Her grief hadn't vanished, but it no longer consumed her. She still walked to the stop every morning, sometimes with a cup of tea, sometimes just with silence, not because she was waiting, but because it had become something else now. A place of memory, a place of healing, a place where two broken souls had met and held on long enough to keep each other from falling. Summer passed, and when autumn came to Maple Ridge, the leaves on Whitmore Avenue burned orange and gold. Wind tugged at porch flags and rustled newspaper bundles left on stoops. Life, as it always does, moved forward, slowly, without asking permission. But some things stayed. The bench at the corner of Station Street now bore a brass plaque, one polished weekly by Bev from the diner, with 3 simple lines. "In memory of Rusty. He waited every day and taught us not to forget." Across the street, the little wooden doghouse still stood, clean, empty, untouched. The kids in town had stopped playing ball near it. Even the mailman walked a little wider around it, as if the ground still remembered weight. And the bus stop? It was just a bus stop again. But sometimes people lingered, for a few quiet seconds, just enough to nod toward the old shelter or glance at the bench before moving on with their day. Dana stayed in town, not forever, but long enough. She rented a small place above the pharmacy and volunteered at the library. Eventually, she took a part-time job helping at the front desk, just like Miss Lillian used to. She never replaced Rusty, never looked for another dog, but every now and then, a stray would wander by, and she'd keep an extra biscuit in her pocket just in case. When asked, she would say, "I came here to see a dog. I stayed because he saw me first." In the spring of the following year, Walter Henley's old house was sold. A young couple with 2 children moved in. They kept the red door, repainted the porch swing, and in the backyard, they planted a maple tree for shade. They said, but they left the front step just the way it was. Locals smiled, because even if they didn't say it out loud, everyone knew that was Rusty's porch. Years later, a local journalist, the granddaughter of Earl, the bus driver, wrote a short book called The Dog Who Waited. It wasn't a bestseller. It didn't need to be. Copies ended up in the town library, the middle school, and a few dog shelters across Indiana. Dana mailed one to her sister in Ohio. She tucked another under her pillow the night before she moved back to Columbus. She never came back to Maple Ridge. But that didn't matter. Some places never leave you. Some dogs never do either. At the edge of Station Street, in early morning light, the bronze on the bench still shines. And if you're quiet enough, you might hear a bus pulling in, a child asking their mother, "Who was Rusty?" And her answer, soft but certain, "He was the dog who waited, not because he had to, but because love doesn't know how to leave." If this story touched you, let it live on. Share it. Leave a comment, your own memory, your own Rusty. Like it if it made you feel something. Subscribe, because some stories are meant to be heard, not just read. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again at the corner.